So thank you for joining us. We're going to do Johnny's Jihad. This is the segment where we give the audience a chance to ask a Muslim any questions regarding Yahya or Johnny and his religion of Islam. This segment aims to educate and inform the listenership on the realities and speculations surrounding Islam and its followers. So we have a couple of questions that were posted on the Facebook. And the first question for you, Yahya, how are you doing, by the way?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me on the show.
No
I was
worries.
glad to be here.
So the first question is from Justin Price Nelson, and he has posted, does the new Quran, he put an emphasis on new, does the new Quran teach love and tolerance?
It's an interesting phrasing. I'm not sure what he's referencing when he says the new Quran. There's not a new Quran. There might be a new translation of it, but there's certainly no one has taken to themselves to rewriting the Quran as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know. So I'm not sure what version, but if he's asking if the Quran itself, yes, it does teach love and peace.
Tolerance.
I'd like to say first off that Islam actually means peace. So there's your answer right there.
But what about tolerance, John?
Absolutely. There's plenty of verses or ayahs about tolerance, about love, about peace, and our duty as Muslims to spread all of the above.
Do you have any on hand to...
I actually do. I have Surah 39, Ayah 41, which is called Al-Zumar, means the crowds. So it's referencing crowds of people, and it says, assuredly we have sent down the book to you in right form for the good of man. Whoso guided himself by it does so by his own advantage, and whoso turns away from it does so at his own loss. You certainly are not their keeper.
So I hope that satisfies you.
Does that mean you are all... Just because you're not their keeper doesn't mean you might not end up being their policeman or their, control system. Because, what does it end up being? Realistically, in the thick of it, it gets pretty hard. It gets pretty hard and heavy for people. I don't know. I'm not to say that Islam is to blame, but I would think it would be obvious. I'm not familiar with Islam enough to speculate, but I would think that there would have to be elements of love and tolerance for it to be applicable to anybody's life in any way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, and not only that, that such a structure publicly, what happens internally and inside the family, I'm sure the woman has, especially because that's how I'm familiar so much about women's treatment. But I wonder how that manifests itself privately. I think that women probably have a tremendous amount of control as it is in Christianity as well, and Judaism. That the man is outwardly in control, but the woman controls the man realistically in some aspect or another. Women are necessary, right?
Absolutely. We have that whole power behind the throne saying, anyways, for a reason.
Well, the what?
The power behind the throne, referring to the king and the queen. There's 100 different ways you can say it, but absolutely. Any smart guy is going to listen to his wife.
Well, some people might disagree with you. Depends on if she's mad or not. But and that's actually wrong of me to even make the assumption that that's the biggest issue is just women's treatment. Obviously, I jump to the conclusion that it has to do with love or tolerance, has to do with women, which most problems that exist, even in a religious structure between women and men, they were hanging witches and burning witches by the thousands not all that long ago, mainly because they were articulate and smart and had a capability or an attachment to something else. And so Islam, love and tolerance, Christianity spins it like, doesn't matter, liberalism spins it. It doesn't, so I have a question. My question, the biggest one for me, is what is jihad really? I've heard it a lot in my life, and I've heard people explain it to me, but I want to hear from your mouth, what is jihad?
Damn good question.
Okay, so you want to know what a jihad is, or what is jihad, not what a jihad is. Let's see here. Jihad, essentially, what it means is something that is, we are expanding the knowledge, and we are bringing Islam to places that it wasn't previously. It's certainly not a war terminology, as you would be led to believe by a lot of people, and as a lot of people have been led to believe. It's definitely not a war terminology, and it has nothing to do with combat at all, actually. What I can tell you about Jihad is it's something we're doing right now. It's educational for both parties. We're both taking something away, and essentially what Jihad is, basically, to sum it up, is us expanding the knowledge of Islam and bringing it to people who previously did not have that knowledge.
And that's a great answer because, I mean, as the media would have you believe, they put this negative connotation on it as if it is some type of, like, hostile term, you know what I mean? And doing my own research, it does, you come to find out after actually doing research, that it doesn't mean at all what Captain Asshole Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, any of those fuckheads would have you believe.
Well, absolutely.
That was a great question.
There's certainly, I want to add this too, there certainly are Muslims who do believe that jihad is something that pertains to combat and is like a forceful forward movement for Islam, which is where a lot of that misconception comes from. So that is unfortunate that they've mistranslated that, but that's absolutely not a wartime terminology.
Good to know. So I hope you're satisfied with that answer, Justin Price Nelson. We've elaborated on it for you. Does anyone else have a comment on that?
Well, I just don't. What? Oh. Well, I don't know. So the Quran teaches only tolerance and love, and not a judgment or some sort of, like he was saying about the police thing, and how do they interject with when they're when they're dealing with an infidel? Like, is there a judgment passed? And I mean, you were talking about something earlier, Jacob, some things that you had to say.
I imagine the Quran's much like the Bible, where there are many contradictory things you can take out of context and throw at each other, because I got on this crazy evangelical website today, that was unholy quotes of the Quran.
Oh, here we go.
So, disclaimer on where I got these. But this one is, how do you say the terminology for verse? And
the surah will be the chapter, and the ayah will be the verse. So
Surah
it would read
5. Ayah 51.
Absolutely, you got that.
And it says, "Believers take neither Jews nor Christians for your friends."
That's interesting. It actually says in that same chapter, they talk about how you shouldn't take friends as disbelievers, is what it says. The people who take for sport your religion and mock it. Is actually what that refers to, and that's not even the full verse you have there.
Obviously.
They've picked and chose what sounds right for them. But no, actually, quite the opposite. I mean, we have a pretty strong interfaith community here in Salt Lake City, actually, and we interact, and I've met actually a few rabbis from Salt Lake City who are great people. And just the same, in that same chapter there, it actually talks about taking friends from other religions. It actually likens Christians to being more like Muslims than Muslims at that time, because they weren't acting so great, which is why we were given more books on top of the previous doctrines, the Bible, the Torah, the Talmud, and the previous scriptures.
Great.
So, sufficient answer.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So, and this is a big question because we have a Mormon here, you know, good
What
old,
up?
and then we have a Muslim here. So how do Muslims perceive
We're brothers in
Mormons?
polygamy.
I know, that's true.
Adorable.
They perceive them as adorable.
How do they perceive Mormons? How do these two different cultures, different religions, how do they...
I know Mormons. I mean, I can't obviously speak as any official.
Right, of course.
But
why not? Just go for it. You can speak officially. Go speak officially.
I know there's a general tone of fear and I don't want to say hatred, but almost it's like an insane paranoia and fear about the Muslims.
Well, I mean, you can thank the media for that.
So you're talking about in the
for sure.
esoteric of that, but I mean, realistically, any religion on the front is not going to be telling people unless, like, they know that their group is going to be pre-designed to be making war or something like that. They're not going to lure them in with, like, oh, it's going to be a battle. You're going to tie yourself to this, and you're going to die for this. You know, like, they lure people in with, like, it's tolerance, man. Things are good. You put your face in, like, jump on in, and then all of a sudden they start to rope you in with the war, potentially later when, you know, like, when gods clash, it gets pretty hairy.
Well, I mean,
that's been the cause of war since the beginning of time.
Oh, yeah.
well, and goes back to the only motivations that we have with people like Israel. It is biblical. They tell us that, you know, the Israelites are the fucking people of God, and that's why Capitol Hill acts that way.
Well, the children of Israel, they call them, and it
And
even refers to that in the Quran, and they were the people of God.
And we all know how historically credible religious texts are.
Okay, can I throw another evangelical crazy quote at John?
Yeah, go for it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is another one I found. It's how do you say it again?
Surah
9, Ayah 121. And it says, believers make war on the infidels who dwell around you.
Okay, I'd like to throw this out there real quick before we address that.
I'm glad you came prepared,
yes.
Jacob.
The word infidel is actually a Christian word. There is no word translation for infidel from Arabic.
Cool, what's the...
So the
So
word
what's that all about?
would be kafir, which would be disbeliever. It's without any negative connotation. It would literally be a disbeliever in Islam. So they would use that to describe a Jewish person or a Christian or an atheist. And infidel is actually a Christian terminology that you guys coined while you were burning witches and what was
Well,
the...
thanks, Jake. Thanks for that.
My people fled to
The
America,
fornicators.
dude, early.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter who made it up. In the end, it's who's yelling it in modern times. You know what I mean?
How
like,
relevant is it?
Yeah.
CNN and Fox
Exactly.
News
That's a
are...
good
I don't
question.
care who made up the word Adam. It has a different implication.
Well, that's CNN and Fox News that are throwing that around more than any extremist group with parentheses around
Yeah.
that.
People with
Muslim
rationale,
organizations.
obviously, people who aren't indoctrinated by the media have their questions as well, and certain things become evident, like when you ask about female circumcision and find out the truth. I mean, things like, it doesn't matter who you are and like where you come from. It's like those are fucking
Visceral, terrible things that do exist, and it is a darkness that makes anybody uncomfortable, especially when it's done under the guise of religion, and it happens far too often, unfortunately.
because
Unfortunately,
especially
it does,
patriarchal
but I would
powers,
like to
that's
regress
distressing.
back
Absolutely.
to Jacob's question very quickly. Would you mind reading that verse to me one more time?
Yeah, it says, believers make war on the infidels who dwell around you.
Okay, so the verses, I've noticed this every time I'm reading the Quran, the verses that usually follow verses that say anything about war, talk about, they actually go further to explain the terms of combat as far as what's acceptable, what isn't, and as always in the second verse, or the second surah of the Quran, it says only to attack those who have attacked you first. And it says never to fight them in your sacred cities or their sacred cities. And it says don't continue fighting until they don't exist. But it does say not to persecute them. It says persecution is worse than death. So what they're saying is don't persecute these people, don't drag this out. If a war comes, then try and end this war. And it just as well, it says if they stop fighting you, then stop fighting them.
Yeah.
That's
And
the
it
end
also-
all. If they retreat, then you don't advance and kill them all.
And it
Makes
also...
sense.
That's rules of combat more than
Yeah,
So
anything.
it also
where
says
the
don't just... It says take them as your prisoners, but treat them well if you do. And also, what else?
The first man to ever sing the Adhan was actually a slave. The man who sang the call to prayer the first time ever was actually a
He was a
slave.
slave.
And he was described as having the most beautiful voice.